serve our nation and the world.
We've had a great start. Now we must make sure our mission endures for generations to come.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the 43rd President of the United States, George W. Bush.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you. I appreciate it. I hope you're ready to laugh tonight. There's an exhibit out there, and the panel tonight will talk about the lighter side of the presidency. I contributed to the lighter side of the presidency. I mean, for example, during an education deal, I said, "Is our children learning?" I was trying to promote family values, and I said, "Single moms are just trying to put food on their family." And of course, one of the most famous ones, misunderestimate. I actually said it at a press conference. And so tonight we smile and laugh. As we do so, we of course think about the people in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is showing his true self. And America's showing its true self too, because all across our country people really grieve for the horror we see, and we're helping them a lot. Here at the Bush Center, we're constantly talking about the value of freedom, something that the Ukrainians are showing on our TV screens every day, their desire to be free. And so we laugh, and it's important to laugh. And as we do so, we remember those who hurt. At any rate, we're glad you're here. Hope you enjoy the evening. I'm looking forward to being the butt of all the jokes one more time. Thanks for coming. And now, by the way, the panel. Moderators Ken Hirsch, who runs the Bush Center very well, as well as Karen Hughes, who was by my side when I ran for governor, got elected governor, and when I ran for president and got elected president. David Litt is an author and former speechwriter for Barack Obama, and of course the guy that provided 32 different humorous things in Washington, D.C., most of which were directed at me, Landon Parvin. So please welcome our panel.
Thank you, President Bush, and thank you all for being here tonight. Before we get started, just for everybody's information, we're obviously our hearts and thoughts are with the brave folks in the Ukraine, and the proceeds from tonight will be donated to the organization CARE, which is helping women and children in and around the Ukraine. So you're all contributing in your way. So thank you. We also want to thank our sponsors for the special exhibit, including Next Point tonight for the Engage series, but the Dallas Tourism Public Improvement District, FlexJet, Texas to Brazil Restaurants, and Baird. Thank you for their sponsorship, because sponsors are what help us put all these programs on. President Bush mentioned President Zelenskyy, who has shown he's more than just a comedian. He's also a schooled lawyer. But in this crisis, he has shown an ability to connect with people, to be very empathetic, to be genuine, and underestimated. Sounds like a familiar leader we know. And the impact of that is there for all of us to see. I want to talk about, I want to start on a little bit more serious note, because 9/11 happened and it changed the Bush presidency. And during the aftermath of 9/11, there are obviously traditional humorous events like the Gridiron Dinner and the White House Correspondents Dinner. And in particular, in March of 2002, which is one of the first of these humor events after 9/11, President Bush was toned down in his remarks, although he did comment to say that you got to learn to laugh in D.C. And importantly, he said, I think a society that can poke fun at its political leaders is a society that is a confident society and a free society. So we're delighted to be here. And then he went on to deliver subdued remarks and remember Daniel Pearl. In 2007, it kind of happened again right after the Virginia Tech shooting. The White House Correspondents Dinner was a few days later. So Karen, I want to start with you. As a communications director and strategist, how do you approach those events to strike the right tone?
Well, tone is obviously critically important. The president sets that tone for the country and sets the tone. And in the days after 9/11, as you might imagine, those were very difficult, very somber days at the White House, as they were throughout the country. Thousands of people had lost their lives. Families had lost loved ones. The American people were in shock. Many of them were frightened. I remember going to church and flight attendants were crying. So there were very difficult days. And the things we did in those early days were to set a tone that the president was a strong leader for the country, that he was rallying the country. I remember him visiting a mosque to show that we should not take our anger at the terrorists out on our fellow Muslim Americans. We had a moment of silence on the White House lawn. The entire staff gathered in a very moving moment to mark the 1 week after the attacks. We, of course, went to Ground Zero, and President Bush, I think, really ignited the country and our resolve, and in many ways the world, with his bullhorn moment that's featured here in the museum. But gradually, I think I was struck getting ready for this event as I looked back over my photos from those weeks, that gradually, despite the serious nature of our jobs, we still had lighter moments. I remember we were sitting through an economic briefing, and it was droning on, and President Bush looked over at the economic advisor and said, "Lindsay, you're losing airspeed and altitude." And we all just cracked up, and it was a moment of relief. President Bush has a joyful spirit, and those moments really, I think, helped lighten the mood in what otherwise would have been a very difficult time in the White House.
Right. Now, Landon, in April of 2002, so this was after 9/11, the White House Correspondents' Dinner was largely business as usual, and of course, at these events, you always made it a point to recognize our military and our veterans and those protecting our country abroad. Talk about how you approached that event, and really you had some unique slideshows that I think were the kind of the centerpieces of that event, and a particular style around poking fun.
2002. Yes, this would have the White House Correspondents' Dinner. People were still getting to know the Bushes, and so the idea we had was, so they would really know them, to do a family photo album. And the president said, "Well, why don't you go down to my dad's library in College Station and go through our family photo albums, pick out some, and we can have some fun with them." So I went down there, and Barbara Bush had put together a scrapbook for each of the kids, and she had other scrapbooks of the family. So I went through and picked out just intimate moments. And it was a very personal feeling. Going through somebody's scrapbooks, it's like going through their underwear drawer. So anyway, we came back, and
that was at the 2001. The Family's album was the 2001.
Oh, it was. We're in 2002.
And the 2002 was the West Wing slideshow. So that was
2002 was which one?
Was the West Wing slideshow about.
West Wing.
But let's talk about 2001. Since you talked about it.
Okay.
Because 2001 was in April of 2001, before 9/11. So this was before the tone change that Karen talked about. And I think we do have a little bit of that to show the audience.
Yeah, let me just say,
before you go into it, talk us through the process.
Okay. The president did probably 60 of these dinners over the years. Maybe not quite that many, but there were a lot. And so after a while, they kind of blur together. So.
Well, since you raised it, though, but I think it's important. Why don't we go to April of 2001, because that was before 9/11. And I think that you had a little more free. I think probably a little more freedom given the clips we're about to see. So why don't we show those for a minute?
But times were hard back then. This, of course, was during the great drought of 1953. Dad, Neil, Doro, Marvin, and Jeb. In my family, with all those kids in the tub, it's not arsenic in the water I'd be worried about. Some people have asked me, however, if the vote recount left any hard feelings between my brother Jeb and me. Not a bit. In fact, here's a picture of the governor of Florida.
When the networks reported on that the next day, they put a little black box over. We had a lot of fun.
So we're going to come back to that. David, the 2011, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, there was kind of a similar experience, but at that time you didn't know about it. You walked us through it, but I think this audience ought to hear this vignette.
Yeah, I always come back to this story because for me this was when I first realized what working at the White House really entailed. I started at the White House in April, the beginning of April 2011, and the Correspondents' Dinner usually is at the end of April. And I was 24 years old, you know, showing up for work and pretty sure that every day I'd go through security and then they would be like, no, someone clearly made a mistake, get out of here. And, but the one thing I knew that I could do, because I had done it a little bit before, was pitch jokes, you know, for these humor dinners. And so, you know, I pitched a bunch of jokes, got a few in. That was not a year I was, you know, what I often described it as is it was a team effort, but for a couple of years, if it had gone badly, it would have been my fault. This was not one of those years, so I was pitching them to the speechwriters in charge. I got a couple in. The one I was really proud of, the sort of idea behind the joke was that, you know, a lot of the 2012 campaign was coming up. A lot of people were saying, you know, Obama isn't really American, you know, he was born in Kenya, or pointing out that his middle name was Hussein. So we were saying, you know, some of these candidates running against me in 2012, you know, what about them, right? So Tim Pawlenty, he was governor of Minnesota, sounds all American, but have you heard his real middle name? That's right, it's Tim Bin Laden Pawlenty. So I was very excited about this joke. It was like one of 4 I had in the speech, and it was the first time, you know, Bin Laden had not been in a joke, obviously. And also as a comedy word, Bin Laden works really well because it's got the strong sound, you know, the B sound at the beginning. Not a great guy, but a good joke word. And so I was very enthused about this joke, and then I heard at the last minute that the president had been in the Oval Office with his team, you know, the senior people on the team, and he had cut my joke, and he had changed it from Bin Laden to Hosni Pawlenty. The Hosni Mubarak had just been deposed in the Arab Spring. And Hosni is a terrible comedy word because of that big, the O in the middle, and it ends on a vowel. And so I remember being absolutely furious and saying, I'm 24, I don't know what I'm doing, but I know about that, you know, and I pulled out my BlackBerry and I typed you know, an angry email being like, I don't care if the president cut this joke, we need to get it back in, you know, the whole thing. And then I sort of felt this like bureaucratic angel on my shoulder just saying, you know, stay in your lane. And so I didn't write the email, but I went to the dinner. And the president used Hosni, and the joke went terribly, so I felt very vindicated and angry about that. And then the next morning, or the next afternoon, I guess, you know, the news broke that the raid had occurred and they had got Bin Laden. And I remember realizing, oh, I see, like in the White House, like the jokes are not just jokes. This is like a grown-up stuff. And so that was my introduction to that. Although they shouldn't have used Hosni. They should have used Saddam, in my opinion.
So in other words, it's not all about you.
No, just a tiny bit.
Okay, so let's stay on President Obama, because this is also a true story, that the Obama administration was really one of the first to really embrace social media and the influencers. And that was not a big part of the Bush administration, for obvious reasons. So in 2014, not because President Bush doesn't like to tweet or email, it's that Twitter wasn't around. Okay, now
He likes beeping noises even better.
You helped President Obama get on a show called Between the Ferns, which with Zach Galifianakis, to promote Obamacare. And I want to watch it, but then I want to talk about the decision and how it worked, both from a comedy standpoint, but also a policy standpoint.
So do you go to any websites that are .coms or .nets, or do you mainly just stick with .govs?
No, actually, we go to .govs. Have you heard of healthcare.gov?
Here we go. Okay, let's get this out of the way. What did you come here to plug?
Well, first of all, I think it's fair to say that I wouldn't be with you here today if I didn't have something to plug. Have you heard of the Affordable Care Act?
Oh, yeah, I heard about that. That's the thing that doesn't work. Why would you get the guy that created the Zune to make your website?
Healthcare.gov works great now. And millions of Americans have already gotten health insurance plans. And what we want is for people to know that you can get affordable health care. And most young Americans, right now, they're not covered. And the truth is that they can get coverage all for what it costs you to pay your cell phone bill.
Is this what they mean by drones?
The point is that a lot of young people, they think they're invincible.
Did you say invisible? Because
No,
I just think like that's impossible.
not invisible, invincible.
Okay.
Meaning that they don't think they can get hurt.
I'm just saying that nobody could be invisible if you had said invisible.
I understand that. If they get that health insurance, it can really make a big difference. And they've got till March 31st to sign up.
I don't have a computer, so how does...
Well, then you can call 1-800-318-2596.
I don't have a phone. I'm off the grid. I don't want you people like looking at my text, if you know what I mean.
First of all, Zach, nobody's interested in your texts. But second of all, you can do it in person. And the law means that insurers can't discriminate against you if you've got a pre-existing condition anymore.
Yeah, but what about this, though?
That's disgusting. How long have you had that?
Oh, just 4 months.
Really?
Spider bites. I got attacked by spiders.
Zach, you need to get that checked right away. You need to get on healthcare.gov because that's one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen.
Is your plug finally over?
I suppose so.
Okay, so David, how much of that was scripted and how much was ad-lib?
So it was almost all scripted, although I should say I didn't script it. We had the Funny or Die team that did the Between Two Ferns that did the show and had done all the other episodes. We had them come in, and so generally we kind of switched roles. If it was something that was, the president was being funny, you know, I was trying to be the funny guy, but then when we had professional funny people come in, I was the boring person. I think my big contribution to that was like adding the phone number to the, you know, that was the part I know you all enjoyed. And so, and I thought that I remember thinking that this isn't going to be a bad idea, which is a good reason.
It was
that no one
viewed
really
40 million times.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I wrote a serious speech about healthcare that had, you know, a couple months earlier, and I did this math once. I think for every like 6 people who had watched that speech online, you could fill Radio City with people who watched that video in the first 24 hours. So it was. I think it was eye-opening because we realized that the humor side could travel so widely on the internet, and it got outside the normal bounds of public discourse, which, you know, at the time, the Obamacare website, the normal bounds of public discourse were not so kind to us. So it was a way of getting outside of the bubble a little bit and reaching people directly, and I think it really set the tone for a lot of what happened, you know, in the last couple of years of the administration.
Right. Now, Karen, President Bush obviously didn't have the social media industry wasn't around, and his more personal style, as people in these audiences know, we see a relaxed former president, very funny, very witty. Talk to us about how he was in office and his leadership style.
Well, I always said two things about working for President Bush. One, that he was challenging because he always kept you on your toes, but two, that he was just really a lot of fun. And he created a culture that made it fun to come to work. And I think it really built you can see there, I mean, he freed us to be creative, to cut up, to enjoy things. And that really made a difference. I watched him use humor in so many occasions to diffuse tensions, to just make your day a little brighter, to give you a more joyful spirit, a more creative spirit. One of my favorite stories, I also watched him use it really to kind of correct the power imbalance. He was very cognizant that, as he says, people would stand outside the Oval Office and say, well, I'm going to tell him what I really think. And then they'd walk in and say, oh, Mr. President, you look wonderful today. And so he was very cognizant of that. And so he took special efforts and used humor to try to diffuse those kind of situations. And one of my favorite stories, in the days after 9/11, he started calling the terrorists folks. And so one morning it fell to me to go into the Oval Office and say, Mr. President, these are trained killers. I don't think you ought to be calling them folks. Well, there's a lot of bad folks in the world too, he said. And I'm never one to give up. And so I said, but yeah, these are killers. They're terrorists. They've killed a bunch of our people. Don't call them folks. Anybody else not like what I have to say today, he said. And of course, no one said a word. And later that day, we flew to Chicago. We were restarting airline operations. And he gave this great speech, really from the heart, impassioned. I saw this strong president up there. And he came off the stage and he saw me and he said, I say anything wrong that time? And I kind of winced because one of my deals is to always be honest, and he had. And I said, well, Mr. President, it was a great speech, but you said Mr. Underestimate. I did not. And Andy Card, who was standing there very helpfully, said, oh, yes, Mr. President, you did 3 times. And so the president walks off, 3 lousy words, 3 lousy words. A guy pours his heart and soul into the speech, and all they can talk about are 3 lousy words. So later that day, I'm sitting in the senior staff cabin on Air Force One, and I hear this rustle behind me, and a pair of hands land on my shoulders, and it's the President of the United States who, in a very loud voice, announces, I'm going to misunderestimate folks. And then the important part is he leans down and says, I want you to always tell me what you really think. And so that's a great example. He realized he'd been grumbling a little. He didn't want me to hesitate to give him my unvarnished opinion. And he really used humor in that way to make people feel comfortable giving him their best advice.
And that started even on the campaign trail years before as governor.
It did. It did. We had an infamous dove hunt. I like to say I had never been dove hunting, and I have still never been dove hunting. Although I went out with a group of about a gaggle of 20 reporters and photographers. President Bush was determined that he was going to go dove hunting. He was running against Ann Richards, and she always did pictures of herself hunting, and I was kind of opposed to it because I didn't want any blood on camera. I thought it sounded kind of gory, but he was determined that he was going to be pictured dove hunting. And so we went out, and I remember thinking no self-respecting bird would come within miles of this crazy group. But at one point, the guide says, dove on the left. And I hear President Bush, he shoots, and miraculously this bird falls from the sky, and there's no blood. And President Bush goes out and picks it up and hands it to the guide, and I'm like, perfect. This has gone perfectly. We go back to our hotel rooms, and I get a call from the campaign headquarters. And it's one of our press guys, and he says, Karen, I got a call from a TV station in Houston. That bird, are you sure it was a dove? And I said, of course it was a dove. Then I think, who am I to know what a dove is? I said, I don't know. Of course it was a dove. The guy said it was a dove. He said dove on left. And Reggie says, well, they're actually saying it's a protected, endangered species songbird called a killdeer. And so I, horrified, run down, we're saying it's some, motel outside of town on the outskirts near the hunting ground. I run down the hall and knock on President Bush's door and say, "That bird, was it a dove?" And he says, "Of course it was a dove. What do you mean?" And so I tell him the story, and he says, "Well, we got to call the guide." And he calls the guide, and I hear him say, "It was? Well, why didn't you say anything?" And so President Bush hangs up the phone and looks at me and says, he was afraid to say anything. He didn't know what to do, so he didn't say anything. And so we look at each other and say, "What do we do now?" And simultaneously, we both kind of said, "We have to confess. We confess." And so we called every reporter that had been on the hunt with us, and he said, "I have to confess, I am a kill-D killer." And that afternoon, he opened a news conference in Dallas by saying, "Thank God it wasn't deer season. I might have shot a cow." You know, it's really funny because the senior political reporter at the Dallas Morning News at the time, Sam Adelstein, told me, he said, "Karen, this could really hurt him." But I think his ability to laugh at himself, to be honest, to laugh at himself really helped people see a different side of him. And actually, you know, I don't know that it helped him, but it certainly, I don't think, in the end, hurt him. And to show that he passed that sense of humor along to his family, a few weeks later, we were at the State Fair of Texas, and his daughter, many of you may see her on the Today Show now, Jenna, saw one of those stuffed animals in the carny booth, and she picked it up in the midway and in front of the TV cameras said, "Hey, Dad, look, a kill-D."
So, Landon, to follow what Karen said about laughing at yourself, that was a big theme of your joke writing and planning for some of these dinners. Walk us through the process and tell us how you approach that when the people in the room are the ones you want to poke fun at.
Well, the great gift the president gave me as a writer was that I could go into the Oval Office with a script without anyone having seen it, so it didn't have to go through a committee, because he realized that humor is a very delicate thing. So I went in, he read the draft cold, so there wasn't anyone there who said, "Well, you know, Mr. President, that you're making fun of yourself there." He had the confidence to know that the self-deprecating humor worked. And that was, I can't tell you how much easier that made writing.
Now, I'm told by people who were in the White House that you seemed to have special access that other people didn't have, that you appeared in places and at times that other people weren't. And did you, being the funny guy, did you feel extra pressure?
I always felt responsible for whoever I write for, especially when you're doing humor. You know, I have a friend named Bob Orban. He's one of the old-style comedy writers. Wrote for Skelton and Dick Gregory, and even an old crooner from the 20s named Rudy Valley. He's just a classic fellow. And he said, doing humor is like standing up naked, turning around and saying, "Well, what do you think?" Because you're vulnerable, right? And the president realized there was risk involved, but he had the confidence to go with it.
And how much rehearsing did you do?
Well, it varied over the years. At the beginning, when we were getting our routine down, I'd take a script in maybe 12 days in advance, and then I'd come in a few days later with new lines to replace the ones he'd taken out. And then we'd have a rehearsal, and then we'd have a rehearsal in the residence the night of the event. But over the years, it got down to where I would go in on a Monday, he'd go over it, we'd maybe have a phone call, and then we'd rehearse it on Saturday before he went over.
So he got better as the 8 years went on.
Yeah, we got used to the rhythm of it.
Mm-hmm. Now, David, President Obama had the reputation, no drama Obama. And now you were having to write comedy for him. What makes a good political joke for a guy whose motto is no drama Obama?
Well, I think, you know, what's interesting to me always is about the joke writing side as opposed to the serious speeches. is also, because we're talking about, you know, the amount of time you spend in the Oval, and the difference, I think, that just as a sort of a craft thing that people don't always think about is that if a speech is, let's say, about education policy or, you know, economic policy, probably the president has said something like that before. So if I was writing a speech about education for President Obama, you know, he'd look at it the night before, but it would be pretty familiar. And jokes, almost by definition, they have to be new, and every word and every bit of punctuation really needs to be in the right place. And that was something, you know, I always felt like that President Obama understood really well. I mean, I have, you know, the marked up drafts he would do right before the end, and a lot of the time, you know, it's little changes, right? However, change to a but or a comma put in a certain place. And I think the thing about President Obama was that when he was doing the comedy side of things, or, you know, the joke dinners, he didn't, you know, he wasn't particularly mean, you know, if he didn't like a joke, right? You know, he was pretty nice about it, but he'd just sort of go, oh, yeah, I don't get that. You know, it was very, I remember once pitching him something and he said, well, that'd be funny if a comedian did it. And I was like, okay, that joke is never appearing again. But I do remember, yeah, I mean, there were, you know, the thing that I think made him really strong about that, actually, that's kind of contained in that, is that he really understood what his public persona was, and then he was able to play off of that. I mean, there was a time when we got pitched a joke. I didn't write the joke, but I really liked it. I brought it into the Oval Office, and it was said, well, you know, we were trying to do a charm offensive with Senate Republicans, which didn't go great. And we said, Mr. President, the joke is that, you know, you're doing this charm offensive, and you discovered that the Senate is like a big high school. And so the joke is, you say, you know, my charm offensive is going really well. I'm learning a lot of the gossip. You know, like, did you know, for example, that Lindsay was talking to Ted, who was talking to Mitch, and they were all like talking? And then I had this moment where I realized that I had just said that in that tone in the Oval Office to the president. And, you know, that was one of those moments where he sort of said, I don't get why that's funny, but I think what he understood is that if he had said that, it would not have been funny, right? The joke was that the president was telling a joke, and the fact that he understood that made our jobs a lot easier.
Right. And I think, you know, he had great attention to detail, and I'm sure you did as well. I think let's look at a clip from the 2014 Correspondents' Dinner, speaking of detail.
Regardless of what happens, I've run my last campaign, and I'm beginning to think about my legacy. Some of you know Mayor Rahm Emanuel recently announced he's naming a high school after me in Chicago, which is extremely humbling. I was even more flattered to hear Rick Perry, who's here tonight, is doing the same thing in Texas. Take a look. Thank you, Rick. It means a lot to me. And I intend to enjoy all the free time that I will have. George W. Bush took up painting after he left office, which inspired me to take up my own artistic side. I'm sure we've got a shot of this. Maybe not. The joke doesn't work without the slide. Oh well. Assume that it was funny.
So, David, you really hung your guy out to dry there, didn't you?
Yes, you just decided to share and let me relive the worst moment of my life. Thank you. And well, the thing and the worst part about it, we had this great slide because we had a really good graphics team, and then they heard that he was going to have just this truly terrible, like, kindergarten art project that the First Lady was holding and just being like, you know, what's that about? And so they went and they got popsicle sticks and, you know, pipe cleaners, and they made this really hideous piece of, I mean, they took a lot of time on this. We did a photo shoot with the First Lady. We had done and then we did a run through of the slides. And this was the same year that healthcare.gov didn't go so great at the beginning. So, I was under very strict orders from my boss, the chief speechwriter, who said, you know, if you want to do all these slides and all this tech, but like make sure all of the tech works. So that was good advice, and so we had the slide in there, and then we did the thing, and I could see that coming for about 15 seconds. You know, I knew that because I could see in the thing there was no slide. I don't know where. I still, to this day, have no idea where it went. So it's just kind of in slow motion, watching myself have a small heart attack.
And what was your little bureaucratic guy saying at that moment?
No, that was like, I'm out of here. You're on your own with this one, pal. And I think, obviously, this was not the most important thing the president did that week or had to deal with, but it was interesting because, he ad-libbed that bit. And as you're talking about, presidents getting more comfortable with this sort of thing. And as we got toward the last few dinners, there were a few moments where he ad-libbed, and I think some of them, if you were watching, you would know that they were not scripted. So it was it was impressive to watch, except for that, which was just deeply painful to watch.
Sorry to bring that one up. You mentioned that folks sent you jokes. Did you get randomly, people just send you emails, say, hey, have your guy do this joke? What do you think?
Me?
Well, both of you.
Yeah,
Both of you. Did you get a bunch of unsolicited comedic advice?
No, but you can never have too many lines to choose from. And once in a while we would, there was a writer by the name of John Max who wrote for Jay Leno on The Tonight Show and does a lot of the Oscars. He would send in lines. So wherever you can get a line, take it.
Yeah, we would get usually, we had a couple of people from Hollywood who would, professional comedy folks who would send stuff. Now I'm worried about using the word folks.
As long as they're not terrorists.
Yeah, that's true, to my knowledge. And which was great. And also really different because the speechwriters, you don't think visually as much, and a lot of people who are in Hollywood, writing TV full time, they're thinking visually. But then you would also get people who sort of say, I have a cousin who is hilarious, and then you just sort of say, oh, okay, well, I will happily read that email, and that's all I will promise. And that does happen too.
Okay, so Landon, in 2005, you had a little change of pace because you got the First Lady involved. I want to show the clip. This was for the 2005 White House Correspondents' Dinner. So I want to show the clip, and then I want to talk about how you pulled that one off.
And so the city slicker asked the old guy how to get to the nearest town. And
Not that old joke. Not again. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been attending these dinners for years and just quietly sitting there. Well, I've got a few things I want to say for a change. This is going to be fun because he really doesn't have a clue about what I'm going to say next. George always says he's delighted to come to these press dinners. Baloney. He's usually in bed by now. I'm not kidding. I said to him the other day, George, if you really want to end tyranny in the world, you're going to have to stay up later. Married to the President of the United States, and here's our typical evening. 9 o'clock. Mr. Excitement here is sound asleep. And I'm watching Desperate Housewives. With Landon Cheney. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a desperate housewife.
So, a couple things. Mrs. Bush is on our board here, and there's a lot of people in our staff that see her coming, and they're a little bit scared. How did you pull that off, and did President Bush really not know what was going to come?
Well, you know, what I was going to say is every time I see that, and I haven't seen it in a number of years, but the remarkable thing is how strong and composed Mrs. Bush is there. I've worked with a lot of speakers, and that presence isn't easy to come by. And going over to the event in a car, Mrs. Bush was cool as a cucumber. I was a nervous wreck, but she was very cool. And, you know, a couple years after that, I had a professor send me a academic study she had done, and it went through what that did for women in the sense that it's not traditional femininity for a woman to make jokes. And it was really quite interesting how this professor was talking about how Mrs. Bush gave people agency, gave women agency, is what the academic called it, which was, and you know, to be independent. And so that was, I didn't realize all that was going on at the time. But to my knowledge, the president didn't know that what she was going to say. Mrs. Bush and I,
It's not a state secret. It's not a state secret anymore. The statute of limitations has passed.
Mrs. Bush and I, you know, we went through the lines and we did a rehearsal, but the president wasn't involved in any of that.
That's great. Now, President Bush, in addition to poking fun at himself, wasn't afraid to share a stage. And in 2006, at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, you enlisted the help of an impersonator, the late Steve Bridges. And that, I want to talk about how that came about, the idea, but then also I want to hear about the practice sessions. But let's watch the segment.
Members of the White House Correspondents Association, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, here I am. Here I am at another one of these dang press dinners. Could be home asleep. Little Barney curled up at my feet. But no, I gotta pretend I like being here. The media really ticks me off. The way they try to embarrass me by not editing what I say. Well, let's get things going or I'll never get to bed. Thank you, Mark. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. As is Laura. She's hot. Muy caliente. As you know, I always look forward to these dinners. It's just a bunch of media types. Hollywood liberals, Democrats like Joe Biden. How come I can't have dinner with the 36% of the people who like me? So I want to talk about some serious issues, such as... Okay. Here it comes. Nuclear proliferation. Nuclear proliferation. Nuclear proliferation. Nuclear proliferation. All right, maintain. Be cool.
Let's give this a try. We must enhance non-compliance protocols, sanctioned not only at IAEA formal sessions, but through intersessional contact.
We must enhance non-compliance protocols, sanctioned not only at EIEIO formal sessions, but through intersexual conduct.
Nailed it.
Nailed it. Nailed it.
That just reminds me. That just reminds me of so many practice sessions about it's nuclear, not nuclear. We even spelled it on the teleprompter, N-U-L-E-E, capital letters.
So what were those practice sessions like, Landon?
They were a lot of fun. Steve Bridges, who played the impressionist, who was the impressionist, we took some elements of his act, and then we just kind of bounced them off the president. We did lines, and they would bounce off that. So it was a collegial effort and a lot of fun. It was the president's idea. He had seen Bridges at some family event, I think, and so I was trying to figure, well, how can we use him? So I figured, have Bridges be the alter ego and say what the president is really thinking. And the audience liked it.
Obviously, that was pretty classic.
Yeah, there we are going through some scripts.
But these speeches were very different from other speeches in the White House. As Landon mentioned, the president gave him a gift of working really, the two of you worked together. I mean, a few of others of us would look at it at the end maybe, or close to the end. But most speeches at the White House go through, 30 or 35 rounds of edits. And in this case, Landon and the president pretty much worked on these together.
And another thing that was helpful of the president is that, like me, he occasionally has an adolescent sense of humor, which which helps, gives you a little freedom.
Right. Yeah, David, so these were, they were made to look, they were obviously produced, but President Obama really did some slick productions that were for some of the White House Correspondents' Dinners. One year, and this video is actually in the special exhibit, you brought in Keegan-Michael Key to play President Obama's anger translator, who stood behind him while he was trying to be calm, which I would encourage people to, when they look in the museum, it's the exhibit that you have to put the earpiece up. But you've got Steven Spielberg to produce an actual production for you. So why don't we play that, and I want to hear if that actually worked.
Well, I was thrilled that Lincoln was a success, and as I was thinking about what to do next, in the middle of the night I woke up and it hit me. Obama. I mean, the guy's already a lame duck, so why wait? Picking the right actor to play Obama, that was the challenge. I mean, who is Obama really? We don't know. We never got his transcripts, and they say he's kind of aloof. So I needed someone who could dive in and really become Barack Obama. And as it turns out, the answer was right in front of me all along. Daniel Day-Lewis. He becomes his characters. Hawkeye from Last of the Mohicans, and Bill the Butcher from Gangs of New York, and Abraham Lincoln in Lincoln. And you know what? He nailed it.
Was it hard playing Obama? I'll be honest, yeah, it was. This accent took a while. Hello, Ohio! Hello, Ohio! I love you back. Look, let me be clear about this. The cosmetics were challenging. I mean, you wouldn't believe how long it takes to put these ears on in the morning. I don't know how he walks around with these things.
But once we had Daniel to play Obama, we had to cast the rest of his team. And I think we've got some pretty terrific performances.
Working with a legend like Daniel is intimidating, but he makes everyone better. Without him, I never could have played Joe Biden. Literally. Hi, I'm Joe Biden.
The hardest part, trying to understand his motivations. I mean, why did he pursue healthcare first? What makes him tick? Why doesn't he get mad? If I were him, I'd be mad all the time. But I'm not him. I'm Daniel Day-Lewis.
So that's pretty slick. Obviously, highly produced. Did it go over the way you wanted it to go over?
Yeah, well, actually, so that was fun because, and the reason I had mentioned this when we were talking about clips to include, was that by far is the most high concept thing I ever kind of got across. You know, the idea of Obama playing Daniel Day-Lewis playing Obama was a very hard sell, and you know, every so often, I suppose, in life, you say, this really unimportant thing has become really important to me. And so getting this across, was that and getting him, this is a video much later, but getting him to do a, like, thanks Obama, was like, those were my two, you know, other people passed healthcare reform or whatever, but these were my white whales. And so, you know, I just love that we were able to do that. Actually, to their credit, so we had the video, our video team did that. And I think it was 25, 26, and we sort of, someone said, well, what if we got Steven Spielberg? And I was like, we could do that? Oh yeah, we're the White House, we can maybe do that. And so, you know, we have Steven Spielberg's people being like, what do you want Steven to do? I was like, I don't know, like, that's a weird question to be asking me. It was it was a very strange experience. And then we had Tracy Morgan come in and we shot that bit, you know, right the day before, which was really, I mean, just incredibly fun, because he was, you know, the 10 seconds were great, and then we were there for 20 minutes, and it was just, the whole thing was just amazing. So, but that I think was the closest we ever came to being able to do something like legitimately high concept and weird, and also with no point whatsoever, right? That was, so it was a fun one.
And that's a lot of work. President Obama, that was, my guess is that it took him a long time?
I think that was 10 minutes. That was kind of our rule was 10 minutes, 2 takes, right? And so, and two, I mean, we haven't talked about it, but his delivery was really good. And I remember once, this was another thing we did, but he was, you know, a couple of lines, and my job was to say, you know, they're ready for you, Mr. President. That was my big part. And so, you know, I did my part, but I didn't do a very good job, but he did it and it was okay. And I remember thinking, we got 10 minutes and 2 takes. He's got to record all this audio. What are we going to do when it's not good? And he did it a second time, and it was really remarkable, where I was like, I know you didn't practice, because I was sitting here watching you. We only had 10 minutes. And he was really very good at identifying what's the most important part of the joke and how do you hit that part. And that was not, you know, humor might be important, but it's not the most important skill. But I think I got to see some of those skills that he applied in other elements of his presidency, you know, which at a much lower stakes level as he was telling jokes. And so it was a really cool experience.
Oh, that's great. And Landon, tell us about your straight men.
Oh, well, there were actually 2 straight men. One straight man would be Dick Cheney, because, I mean, shooting people and, I mean, what more can you ask for in a vice president? And then the other straight woman was Barbara Bush. She was always good for a laugh. She really was. And we sometimes used her. The Alfalfa Club was kind of a Bush family reunion. And President 41 would come, and Barbara Bush, and there were just always a lot of Bushes there. And one year, she did the monologue. President did part of it, she did part of it. And so anyway, she was a great straight person, and always good for a laugh.
Now, you mentioned the vice president. I want to show a clip and see where this ranked in your use of Vice President Cheney in the straight man department.
Yeah, this is, Cheney was, well, I won't tell you. I'll tell you afterwards.
So, go ahead, finish your story.
We use that at the White House Photographers Dinner. I mean, you have White House correspondents, you have alfalfa, gridiron, radio and TV correspondents, and a couple times we went to the White House Photographers Dinner, and I like that because it had music in it, and he actually was writing segue around the White House, and I thought, well, that's too good to pass up.
So he actually...
Oh, yeah, he was actually
He did that himself. You didn't have to convince him to get up on that thing.
No, he was already doing it. Trying to convince him. The president one time, this was the last year for the gridiron, and the president was going to sing at the gridiron. So I was thinking about what song could we sing? And I thought, well, of course I thought Cheney, that's going to be funny if we can get him involved. So I thought, well, what if the president and Cheney sang, I forgot what the song was now. Isn't it terrible? It just slipped my mind.
David might have had your slide that he removed.
Yeah, he removed my slide, didn't you?
Thank you for bringing this up again.
Oh, yeah. I've lost the punchline. But anyway, the president went and asked Cheney if he would do it. He wouldn't do it. So the president sang solo with some Marine backup for the gridiron.
Good.
But normally, Cheney was a good sport about this.
Good. So in the few minutes we have remaining, I want to come back a little bit on the serious, but also the strategic side. And Karen, we've seen a growth.
I just thought of a song.
Oh, here we go. The song.
I Got You, Babe.
Sonny and Cher.
I can just picture him singing back and forth. Didn't happen.
Would have been hilarious.
Okay, I'm trying to get a little more serious here, but we'll try. We've seen an increase in unscripted television, talk shows, Oprah, The View, The Ellen Show, the late night shows, Saturday Night Live, which is scripted. But from a communication strategist standpoint, how risky is it to put your principal in that venue? Is it, and could it backfire? Does it work? How would it work, and how would you counsel your principal in
I think it's risky. I think you have to think carefully about it and select the venue. I mean, what comes to mind for me when I think of it first is President Bill Clinton when he ran on with playing the, was it the trombone?
It was the saxophone.
The saxophone.
As a candidate on Arsenio.
As a candidate. And so the pressure, I remember the pressure was somewhat on us to do some things when President Bush ran, and I believe we did David Letterman, and we went on Oprah Winfrey. I found that the shows like Oprah, where you were able to show the human side of the person, tended to be more effective as a communications tool. The funny shows, they show a side of being funny, but I don't remember the David Letterman show being particularly memorable. He later did one where he did a top 10 list that was very funny. That was probably after Landon started writing some scripts. But, I think the shows, in my experience, what I always tried to do as a communications strategist was to find a setting where President Bush felt comfortable. So that he could show people who he really was, because I was confident that if people saw who he really was, that they would want to follow him. And so from the time in the first campaign in 1994, when I felt like the people of Texas needed to know him a little better, and we invited Jamie Gangel from the Today Show to come to his the lake where he used to fish, to Rainbow Lake, because he was very comfortable there. And people were able to see who he really was and see the convictions that motivated him and the type of person he was. So I always felt that those type of venues were the most important venues. But I don't think it hurts the show that you have a sense of humor and that you're willing to go on and take the spears and arrows from some of the comedians.
Good. And Landon, last word, what makes President George W. Bush, so special to write for?
I'm sorry?
What makes our President Bush so special to write for?
I think for me, it was the freedom he gave me as a writer, but also, we didn't do satire. we did humor. And in humor, there's warmth. And you want the audience to like you more when you sat down than when you stood up. And so I think the president's humor was based on his good-naturedness. And I think that's one of the main reasons political people should use humor. Because it says, look, I am not so powerful and important that I can't make fun of myself. I am like one of you. And I think the president's warmth and it came through.
Well, great. I would like to thank our panelists who have talked about warmth and talked about tone and talked about culture and talked about agency all through humor. And it's what makes us people. And those personal relationships that I hope we get back to when we can turn Zoom off and get back together in venues like this. Many of the vignettes that Karen just referred to are in the special exhibit. So please join me in thanking this phenomenal panel for a real special evening.
Thank you all.
And I'd like to thank Next Point for endowing the Engage series, the Dallas Tourism Public Improvement District, FlexJet, Texas de Brazil, and Baird for sponsoring. Our next Engage event is Sunday afternoon, April 24th. We're excited to have Barbara Bush and Jenna Bush Hager here in this auditorium. It'll be the last stop on their book tour for their new book called Superpower Sisterhood. And on your way out, make sure you stop by the exhibit, and you'll also see Brian Washington's work around the continual struggle, the American Freedom Movement and the Seeds for Social Change, also in Freedom Hall. And as a final reminder, the Bush Institute's work on Ukraine and freedom and democracy is something that's very important to us, and we will continue to fight that fight and do the best we can to support those on the front lines. And at bushcenter.org/Ukraine, you can find the resources if you're so willing to support. Thank you again for joining us. I look forward to seeing you at the next event.
Thank you all.